So when you begin to look at all the things around you, especially the boundaries before you, do you see them as a prison? Or do you see them as a place by which you can grow as high as you need to be? I'm Dr. Dan Milroy, and welcome to Lesson 2, Q&A on the boundaries in our Chaplaincy 201 class. Many of you sent in a lot of great information as far as the questions that I'd asked you to do. And for those of you that were still kind of searching out as far as what questions, making sure about that, it was in the area about learning the right to be heard. Matter of fact, there were 3 questions. I'm going to go over those 3, and then I'm going to start bringing out some of the information that many of you sent as a reminder of where you are in helping others earn the right to be heard as far as your walk as a chaplain. And so earning the right, there were 3 questions that I was asking you to look at. One is talk with them, not at them. That's actually between a monologue and a dialogue. And the question was, when was there an experience where you learned to listen? Then there was a second part that was walking with them, not just leading them. That goes with your agenda and their agenda. And the question was, how can letting their agenda go first allow you to later meet their needs? And then the last question was work with them, not do it for them. That was the aspect of equipping versus enabling. And the question was this: how do you know the difference between the two in your ministry? And so those were the questions that I was asking you to follow up on. For those of you that are joining with me right now, I also want to remind you that in the little small area, there's a chat box. That if you have a question or have something that you want to pull to me, just write it in that, and I will get to that as soon as we get close to the end of our Q&A session today. So with nothing else being kind of in the process, let's jump in and let's get started. The very first question I'm going to go back to, it was, when was there an experience where you learned to listen? Now, learning how to listen, again, is the aspect of not just listening with our ears, but listening with our eyes and listening with the totality of ourselves. That is a full focus listening. It is an active listening. But some of the things that y'all wrote down, I love how you put together, is that not only learning how to listen, but learning what happens when you don't listen well. Norm Blanton kind of put this as far as an example about what happens. He says, even before I began to answer the question, he says, I'm always reminded of what my wife says. You don't listen to what I'm saying. I love what he says in the end. He says, sometimes I just don't hear what she's saying. That's when mistakes are made. I will definitely say that is a big amen right there. Matter of fact, in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13, it says this, that he who speaks before listening, it is folly to himself. What that basically means, that if you speak before you get all the words, you're going to make a mess. Matter of fact, I know the apostle Peter, as far as everything he did, and I relate a lot to Peter himself, because he put his foot in his mouth so much that he had athlete's tongue. And I know some of you would probably be able to say exactly the same thing. Sometimes when we're learning how to listen, it helps us to be able to break down of what our expectations are, because we're really trying to understand. Matter of fact, Covey says this: seek to understand, not to be understood. Todd Hare says this in reference about waiting. He says, just pausing and allowing someone to talk allows them to open up and share what's on their mind. It is a reminder, as he says, that you are in a learning environment. Now, that's huge. I want to go back to what Todd just said there. When you talk about being in a learning environment, it's not just about what you're teaching someone else. The fact that you are also the student in the process. All of life is teaching you something, and we will be a student all the way up until the day that we die. And when we die and when we stand before God, lessons are over, because everything that we need to know will be right there in front of us. But until that time comes, every day is about being in a learning environment, not only working with people and walking with them, but also learning from them, because everybody has something to be able to give to us that we can use. Matter of fact, Colin Powell said this very succinctly. He says, I've learned a lot of great leadership lessons from some really bad leaders. Sometimes you just need to eat the chicken, get off the bones. I like one of the things because it reminded me at being in that learning environment that Todd was talking about, at the Family Life Conference here in Tampa, Florida. It is a program that is called the Weekend to Remember. It's a marriage enrichment program put on by Family Life. And a quick plug for them. If you ever have an opportunity to go be a part of that, I really, really encourage you. Wherever you are, you can just go on the Family Life and find out where the marriage conferences are going to be. It is a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it is a tremendous weekend to invest in your marriage. My wife and I were able to go this last time, actually for the last couple of years, because with our Chaplaincy Q organization, we sponsor a lot of our first responders, and we're able to take them 5 last year, 10 this year. We would love to take 20 next year, depending on the sponsorship. But during this year, one of the speakers that was there taught us something about the pause, the power of the pause. And that's when we basically are quiet. Kind of remember that wait, why am I talking? Yeah. It is the power of the pause that simply said this. He says, when you have things that are frustrating you about each other, he's talking about spouses now. It can be anybody else with your kids and things of that nature. But when you're talking to your spouse and there's something about something that your spouse did that hurts, you need to be able to tell them that. And here's what he had us do. We would turn to each other as spouses. And he set the ground rules this way. He says, it's not about what you're discussing or what you're talking about. He says, but I simply want you to say 2 words to your spouse. And he says, now, spouse, when you hear the 2 words, I want you to count to 5 before you respond. And I thought that was, okay, this is going to be interesting. And he says, okay, each spouse is going to count to 5 before you respond. Now, the 2 words that I want you to say to your spouse is this: that hurt. I want you to know that when he said those 2 words, you could have heard a pin drop in this place, because everyone began to start realizing that what we're here to do this weekend, that weekend for the weekend to remember, not just to learn tools and things of how to help our marriage, we're also dealing with some of the things that hinder our marriage and that sometimes hurt. And so when I turned to my wife and said, that hurt, it was about 5 seconds before she responded. And then when she said it to me, 5 seconds for me before I responded. I want you to know 5 seconds can feel like an eternity. When you are learning how to listen to someone, there are going to be those moments to where there's going to be a pause. Don't say anything. Just allow them to continue to talk, because when you're talking to them, it's going to make a better impact for them. A couple other things that also come out in reference to some other lessons that we're pulling into. James Grimes says this. He says, I had to use the wait when allowing people to finish what they were talking about. He was going into an example of someone that was starting to go into a barrage of all the reasons why he, disregards all the things about grace. And he actually says he says, I had to use the wait approach and allow a person to finish all the reasons why he was rejecting the saving grace presentation. The thing is sometimes you just need to let the people spew out all of the poison out of their system so that they will be able to have something that they can replace it with at that moment. There's going to be an opportunity for it. Now, I want you to realize that there are times where people are just going to keep going and keep going. They're going to tell you all the great reasons of why, they don't need to do this and they don't need to do that, and they don't need to look at Christ and they don't need to look at the Bible. And they're going to keep going on to that. I remember one opportunity when I had in reference to an infantryman that was giving me all the reasons why he wasn't going to believe the Bible and how he was living his life his own way. And then after about, I want to say probably about 15 minutes, I want you to know that was a 15 arduous minutes for me as I was just waiting for him to take a breath, but then just letting him go. Once he finished, and he kind of looked at me, he says, so what do you think? I said, well, let me ask you a quick question. How's all that working out for you? And I just became quiet. See, I wasn't there really at that moment to refute. Oh, I could have. But I just let him not only talk, but I didn't say a lot of words afterwards. I just simply brought back all the stuff that he says he's now believing in and what he doesn't believe in. And I just asked the question, how's that working out for you? Well, then he looked at me and he says, well, since I'm here talking to you, probably not so well. That's what leads me really into that second question. You know, we can learn to listen. We've got to learn to listen. That's not natural. Our natural tendency is go ahead and speak and talk and things of that nature. We've got to be able to not only to learn to listen, but question number 2 that I was asking you to consider, and it was about the aspect of my agenda or somebody else's agenda. Here was the question. How can letting someone else's agenda go first allow you to later meet their needs? It goes back as, are you willing to go on the ride wherever they want to take you? I know in Orlando, because we're here in the Tampa Bay area, in Orlando, Florida, Walt Disney World, one of the rides that I grew up in was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And it's just one that's going up and down, going all over the place and stuff of that nature. And you're just on the ride. You don't know what's about to happen. You don't know where you're coming for. You don't know what's about to happen next. You're just on the ride. And in that same part, you're just simply trying to figure out what's going to next. You know, sometimes people are just going to take a ride and you don't know where you're going, but wait for it. Because eventually you'll come back to a place that you started. That's what I call coming back full circle. Even though it seemed like it was over the river, through the woods, to Grandma's house we go first. It will come back to the beginning. And then they'll simply just wonder, did you hear what you... Now, I like what Miss Wendy had put out. It's sometimes when you're talking with someone, it's constantly sort of responding to them. And that's really the active part of listening. Now, I want you to be careful, because the well-placed, really, you don't say. Can you go more about that? No, I want you to know that those are good things that you can use to kind of keep it engaging. But you've got to be truthful about the engaging. Don't do that if you're not really listening, because they're going to test you on something. And I want you to know that when you're listening and allowing their agenda just to take you on the ride, they may show you some sights that you can be able to come back to, in a sense, of their word pictures and say, hey, when you said this, what did you mean? Or when you said this, you know, that was rather powerful. Matter of fact, Todd, when he was talking about that and working with people, is once permission is given, this shows trust. It gives you the opportunity to offer your thoughts. What is that opportunity? It's when they look at you and say, so what do you think? Timing is everything. And when they open that door to say, what do you think about this? It's huge. The other day I had an opportunity. I was talking with some people. We were doing a video shoot for a particular company, and I was working and talking to some of the fill-ins and those that were there as backdrops and back people and different things of that nature. One young lady, she's so happy about being able to make this her industry. She's in the modeling, she's in the acting and stuff. So I'm just talking to her. Young lady, probably about 21 years old. She's full into this, fully committed into this. And I began talking to her. And I just said, so tell me your story, because I like to hear people's stories. And she began to talk, and I began to hear some things that were rather interesting. And one of the things that she said was about, about changing. And I asked her, I said, so what is the biggest change in you since you've gone into this? And she went through that. She said, really, I've become more lovable. And she started going on to other things. And I let her talk. And then I came back and said, do you mind, let me go back, because there was a word that you said that's a powerful word. And it's a word that said lovable. Can you unpack that for me? Because that really is an incredible word for you to use. It was like on the faucets. Tears started coming down and things like that. And I just kind of sat there. I didn't freak out. Inside I'm like, ooh, what did I do? But I just let her sit there. And then she began to share her heart. I just let her kind of go with her agenda, whatever it was. But I took her back to a place, a site that I saw along the way. And I just asked her to explain it just a little bit more for me. What does that mean to you? And then we went into a good discussion about her past and hurts and scars. Sometimes God is going to put you at the right place at the right time. Actually, it's not sometimes. If you pray for it, it's all the time. Of God putting you in the right place, the right time, to talk to the right person about the right need, so that you move in the right direction. See, that's what God does. When you allow the others to use their agenda first, ultimately, God's agenda will come into that. One of the things that James Grimes also said this about that particular one about pushing your needs. Sometimes you can be pushy, but you realize that other people have pushed things deep inside. Sometimes the agenda is going to take a long time getting there. Sometimes after the first conversation, you're not really going to be able to go that deep. It may be the second conversation or the third conversation. You know, that's okay. Those of us, and I speak to many of you that are out there, those of us that have a fix-it mentality, like, I've got to fix this. I've got to fix this right now. Those are the ones that sometimes you and I, we want to struggle. And if we're meeting with a person right now, we want to make sure that everything is fixed. Matter of fact, we want to do it, one and done. We got it. We got to fix it. Let's go on to the next person. The thing is sometimes it takes 2 or 3 moments just to sit. It's not about fixing. It's just about being faithful. It's about being faithful to let them take you where they want to go in reference to following with them. One of the things that Wendy says about walking with them, she says this about a friend of hers, that when she began to talk, she would just spew a lot of stuff. But then eventually, she just simply allowed Wendy to speak into her life. Why? Because people they just want to know, did you hear what I said? The power of not only hearing somebody, but walking with them on their journey of just processing it is huge. I want you to know, it really is. Proverbs 25:11 says this: a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold and settings of silver. Now that means that when someone gives you the right word, boy, everything gets real at that moment. What would happen if you're the one that's giving them the right word? They now have wealth that they're taking away with, because when they came to you, they may have had nothing, but you gave them something. Actually, the best gold there is, gold that is refined by fire, and that is from the throne of grace. That's huge. So going back into it, when we're learning how to talk, there are issues in our life that we can go back to and say, when did I learn to listen? When did I use the wait? Why am I talking mentality? Then there was the second, about the agendas. Do I push my agenda? Do I let that other person? And how does that help when I just let them take me on their journey, that eventually they allow me to maybe chart the course myself, or even drive? There's a third question that I asked you to consider. It's about the process of working with people, not just doing it for them. It's about equipping them instead of enabling them. And how do you know the difference between the two? Todd says this: if it can thrive and survive with minimum effort or input from you, then you're equipping. If you're enabling and the ministry is relying on you to carry the load, it will stop as soon as you stop. Many people want to go more toward the, I think, more of the enabling rather than the equipping. They want to be the grandpapa. They want to be the person that's responsible for a lot of stuff, so that if something happens, everything stops. I don't know why, because sometimes that may be a feeling of insecurity. Don't really know, because to me, what goes on after I leave a place is actually the truer test of the ministry that I put into place. Everything just simply dissolves when I left. Well, I may have done some great stuff while I was there, but it's what carries on after me that allows the fulfillment and the multiplicity of ministry going into place. That's why each one reaching one in reference to sharing Christ. Teaching them, it's teaching them how to do that, because it goes into the process. And John Maxwell puts it very succinctly about this modeling effort. He says, first, you come with me and watch me do it. And then second, you do it with me. And then third, I watch you do it. And then the fourth, you go do it. And fifth, you find someone else and help them learn how to do it. That's a law of multiplicity. It is also an important principle, not just in ministry, but in chaplaincy. Build the bench. When you teach people how to do things, you're actually enabling them to use their gifts in a very powerful way. When you keep things from people, when you simply do it all yourself, you know what you're doing? You're robbing them of a blessing. Now, guys, I want you to know that I'm not the first one that says, I've got this all figured out. because I'm still learning it. I'm not only an extreme extrovert, but I have an extreme amount of energy, and I just like doing stuff. And so when I see stuff that needs to be done, I do it. When I need stuff that needs to be taken care of, I may come in early for that. Just because I'm here, let me go ahead and do it. That way this person doesn't have to do it. The problem that sometimes I just need to let the person do it, even though it's going to be late. Now for my attitude, now remember, my attitude is always one of we need to always have excellence. There's some people that it's got to come up to that part. They're not always there. And I got to also remember that sometimes my level of excellence may be just kind of like, but in some processes, I've got to let people grow where they do it so that they can learn how to do it better. We're doing something at our new church here at First Homes, a church that is specifically designed for first responders. But the church is growing, and with that, more people are starting to come in. But I have a audiovisual team, both our computer for the presentations that we do on the screen and everything else, and then we have our audio, our sound system. Got a new soundboard. It kind of went from a biplane engine to a jet. All kind of buttons and stuff to push. But what I encourage them to do is, guys, what you're doing is great. Who are you training? Because if you're out one Sunday, who knows what to do, what you do? Ministry doesn't stop. The service cannot stop. I need you to begin building the bench. And that's what they're starting to do, is they're building the bench. Same thing in our music, trying to encourage all of our life team teachers. Hey, bring somebody on, use them as a co-teacher, begin to alternate teaching back and forth, and then start new classes. When you begin to do that, even in the chaplaincy, that's a part as I'm looking at going into my Vision 2020, is to be able to bring chaplains together in our area of Hillsborough County under chaplaincy care as we begin to impact our law enforcement, fire and rescue, security, military, all of it. But one person can't do that. You got to build an army. You got to build a bench. You got to put people in place. You got to start sending them out. I think there's a biblical principle. Oh, yeah. It was when Jethro taught Moses. Teaching them how to do it. That is going to enable people to do what they need to do in a very powerful way. Wendy says this, and she gave a great example of a home advisory TV commercial where a neighbor asked another neighbor about a contractor, and then all of a sudden, the neighbor gets stuck with the whole process of interviewing, purchasing supplies, pricing home, basically doing the job for the person. We don't need to be sucked into other things that really are not our responsibility, or actually our lane. Now, that lane I'm going to come back to in just a few minutes. But sometimes people are very happy to come and bring you a problem, and they just walk away, and they want you to fix it. They want you to solve it. They want you to handle it. They want you to take care of it. I think kids are good with that. The older they get, sometimes they forget that they can be independent. And I'm going to talk about 3 phases of that in a second. But sometimes people will dump things on your table. You know what? You can choose to either pick it up and do it, or you can teach them, hey, before you walk away, let me show you what you need to do. And that way you can go do it, and then tell me how I can help you along the way. But if you can do this, empower them to do it, whether it's kids, whether it's coworkers, whether it's ministries. Because sometimes people have a great idea. They think God's laid something on their heart, and sometimes God has, and they come to you and say, Pastor, we have such a great idea. Chaplain, I've got the great program that we need to do. And they'll tell me the program. They'll say, well, what do you think? I said, well, it's pretty good. Well, when do you want to get started? I said, I'm not. You're going to get started. How can I equip you to do the ministry? See, when you equip people, it allows the responsibility to go back onto them, and it helps them to be able to become who God wants them to be. Matter of fact, it's actually a lot about the balance. Matter of fact, Norm brings that up about the balance in our life, because sometimes we just need to help somebody. Sometimes they just want us to do it for them. And that's where we also have to be wise as a serpent, as gentle as a dove. Now, I said I was going to come back to about independent. There are 3 modes of a person as they're developing their life. And we can take it from child to adult and then going into marriage. That's sort of a good picture that we can use as a context. And let's start with this. A child, when a child is born growing up, a child is dependent on the parent for food, for shelter, for all the things that are necessary during that time frame. But there is a point to where the child is moving from dependency to independency. The child can tie his own shoe. The child can get dressed. The child can eat by himself. The child can study and read. The child is doing a lot of things that sort of be independent. That's a growth of them. There's a maturity in their life. There are things that they can do on their own. In fact, my youngest daughter, probably right around 4.5, she put her hands on her hips and she said, I can do it myself. And I said, well, baby, go ahead. And that's what I continue to encourage her. Well, that's sort of a healthy transition from dependency to independency. But there's another transition that is a greater step of maturity, and that is interdependency. That is when we work with each other. One, dependency, I need you. Independency, I can do it myself. Interdependency, why don't we do it together? Here, we develop synergy. When we're working with people, that's what you want to create, is a synergy type of system that allows them to be empowered to do what they need to do. It gives you the energy of being a part of it as a cheerleader, even if it's just someone going on, but it allows them to then grow to realize, I can do this. And that is going to enable them. Now, the only time that sort of works backwards, actually, is in our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Sometimes we want to be independent, and sometimes we want to say, God, I'm on your team, and aren't I a great player on your team? When it gets right down to it, we will never move beyond dependency. Why? Because I am totally dependent on my Lord Jesus Christ. And everything I need and what he provides, I'm completely dependent. And you know what? In my spiritual walk with him, that's okay. Because that dependency is a deeper form of spiritual maturity. It's when I start being the sheep that goes astray. My wife had an opportunity to talk at a church last week and did just an incredible job. But she was talking about sheep. She was talking about what sheep normally do. Sheep just wander off. And sometimes it's not about sheep wander off because they want to be rebellious. Sometimes sheep just wander off because they just look and say, ooh, shiny thing. Ooh, there's another shiny thing. And they just keep going. And eventually they're isolated and all alone. It's not about the rebellion of the heart. Sometimes it's just the curiosity of our nature. We can tend to wander. Our wandering heart can do that. God says, I always want to be your shepherd. That is dependency completely on him. Why? Because he leads me beside the still waters. He anoints my head. All the things that I need in my life, the shepherd will do for us. So when you're talking to someone, listen to them. When you're trying to walk with them, let them lead. And when you simply just want to make sure that they understand how to do things, mentor and coach. Because that's what's going to help not only earn the right to be heard, but allow you to go from where you are to take them to where they need to be. My friend, that's always ultimately, that's what we're going to lead everybody. As I've gone through some of the other questions here, there was one last question that someone had texted me, and I want to check this out just for a moment on our chat. When it goes about, okay, very good question. It's asking about the standard. When I am looking at the standard, how do I continue to live a high standard when it seems like everyone around is living a lower? It's actually a really good question. Here's what I'm going to ask you. Is that standard first realistic? Because sometimes we can have such a perfectionistic type of standard that no one can even make it. It kind of struggles on that. So first off, I want you to look at your standard and your expectation, because expectation management is going to be important for you as well as for others, because the same standard you hold for you is the same standard you hold for others. But here's what I'm going to ask also. Is when you have a solid standard of excellence, do you change that because someone else doesn't have their standard that matches yours? Ultimately, we are responsible not for what they do. Oh, I think, matter of fact, that's in that lesson. We're responsible to people, not for people. I cannot allow me to gauge my standard on that person when I have a standard myself. Hold on to your standard. You will always be the one that uses the standard as a floor to stand on to reach for the stars, not just a ceiling that closes off the night. Live that. Great question. And as you have other questions, remember, email me. Now, next Tuesday at 4:30, we're going to be coming together, and it is going to be our third lesson. Third lesson is the C out of the ABCs of what it means to be a chaplain. A was the attitude. B was the boundaries. C is talking about the changes that you make, not just the changes you make in the environment around you, also the changes that you make in you to impact the environment. Here's the question I'm going to leave you with, and I want you to think about as you prepare. What is the difference between a dozen eggs, a sack of potatoes, and a can of ground coffee? Say it again. What is the difference between a dozen eggs, a sack of potatoes, and a can of ground coffee? I want you to be thinking about that. Write down your answers. Matter of fact, email it to me, see what you think. And then I will expand on that the next time we meet together. Remember, as you're continuing to move forward in your chaplaincy development, it is what we learn every single day that continuously makes us a student, not just of the success that should be before us, but of also the success of those that we are preparing that will come behind us, for how they are able to walk fully in the faithfulness, depending on the footprints that you leave them in the process. May those that come behind you find you faithful. God bless you as you go into this day, and I look forward to seeing you next week as we join together for our third lesson in Chaplaincy 201, the ABCs of becoming a great chaplain. God bless you as you go into this.